To start off by just welcoming everyone today to the part 4 of our special webinar series featuring the U.S. Patent Office, presented by SCRA and the Kim and Lahey Law Firm. Just wanted to remind the audience that this webinar is being recorded and that SCRA will distribute it to all of the participants afterward today. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box and we will get to those as time permits. And I want to just introduce you to myself. My name is Cherish Benton. I wear many hats. I am the founder and managing director of I4 Series, a business networking organization based in Greenville. And I'm happy to say we're finally planning some in-person networking events. Save the date for September 15th. We'll be making a big announcement about that very soon with some more details. I'm also a fractional marketing and sales professional. The name of my business is InfluWorks, and I work with Doug Kim, who is one of our presenters. And Doug is an attorney and founding member of the Kim and Lahey Law Firm, very well-respected intellectual property attorney based in South Carolina. And we also have joining us from the USPTO, Stephen Yanchu. He is hello, Stephen. He's the special advisor at the Eastern Regional Outreach Office. And there's more about each of the speakers on the presentation, and we will be making the presentation available to download afterward today with their contact information. So you'll be able to reach out to them and learn some more about them through that presentation. So without any more delay, I will turn it over to you guys. We're very interested to hear what you have to say.
Before we get started, one thing, Stephen, if you'd be kind enough to tell us a little bit about your background, particularly both as an examiner and what you're doing now, and then I will get our presentation started while you're doing that.
Sounds great. Yeah, so I've been an examiner for over a decade, somewhere around like 12, 13 years, and you start to lose count after a while. But fuel cells and batteries is my expertise. Really played well because I had a material science engineering background. And so I still use all the information that I didn't think I was ever going to use again, like XRD and even just making of, quenching metals is still something I see in patents, even though it's in batteries and fuel cells. So really useful to be able to use my college background and the education that I received there in my daily job. Got a transition to the outreach department, which has been super fun. Our work falls into two buckets. One is soliciting stakeholder feedback. How's the experience with the patent office? And that way policymakers can make better policies because they'll have a better pulse as to what the experience is like. But for me personally, I like the other aspect, which is doing outreach such as this. Also, I'm spearheading a wine and IP series, which is a 10-part series that looks at intellectual property through the delicious lens of wine. We've also been able to help the Boy Scouts of America, which is now accepting boys and girls, to receive the Inventing Merit Badge. And so it's a really great way to inspire the youth and to connect through intellectual property to these different communities. So.
Oh no, so yeah, Stephen's quite the background. So this part of the series is going to be about what's the most important, if not the critical part of a patent application. To sort of talk about exactly what we're trying to accomplish today, there's no requirement that any inventor have a patent attorney or a patent agent to assist them in the patent office. While it's recommended, what we're going to try to do is give the audience information about both what are the claims, again, the critical part of a patent application, as well as how to communicate with a patent agent or a patent attorney, and do that in hopefully a very conversational kind of way. If there are any questions or comments at any given time, please enter them in the Q&A session and interrupt us. So we want to provide sort of timely information based on what's going on. So this is the path to a patent. That's the first part. we want to talk about is sort of very quickly, what are the supporting parts of a patent application? We've covered this in previous series, but sort of a 2-minute overview, Stephen, of what is it that goes with a patent application that really supports your claims in the application?
Yeah, this question. What is the way that I like to think of the whole patent is a story, right? The title, gets somebody in the right frame of mind. The abstract allows you to kind of start to communicate on a very high level what your aha moment is, what your contribution to science. Your background section allows you to communicate what your springboard was before you jumped into this intellectual pursuit to share your wealth of knowledge to the world. And then you have your summary, which is kind of what is your invention? How would you communicate it to a high schooler? And then the written description part, the detailed description, is where the bulk of it comes from. And one of the suggestions that we'd like to say is write your claims first. What is that intellectual property that you want to be able to sell, to protect? We like to make the analogy that intellectual property is an intangible object, but real property, your house, is real. You can put up a fence and then nobody's allowed on that property, but nobody's really not allowed inside the house, right? If somebody steps on your yard, you're okay. You still want protection for it, but it's really the house that you're trying to protect. And so much the same way with intellectual property, you establish the metes and bounds where if somebody steps onto your property, it's your property. But you've really highlighted that, you cannot come into this area. It is mine. And you have the right to sell, lease, rent, just like you would a house. The same with your intellectual property. And so with that, the claims you write first, so that way your specification has all the terminology. And I'm sure we're going to get into antecedent basis at some point in time with this, but really making sure that the full story is there. All the terms are clearly defined, what you've invented, because when it gets down to working with the examiner, and even if it gets allowed, we always say we want to have a patent that you can take to the bank, not to the courthouse. And that comes from having a really detailed, what is your aha moment? How do you build it? What are you seeking coverage for? And then the negotiations between the patent examiner and the attorney or yourself on what the explicit metes and bounds are for your claims.
Exactly right. And one of the things I can't emphasize this enough myself is that the not just patents, but the entire intellectual property protection strategy should be aligned with your business goals. So when you write the claims, you're really putting a lot of thought into, okay, what is my invention? What's my competitive advantage? Who are my competitors? Who could be out there that sees value in this? And that's sort of the real structure. And that's really before you write the claims, really understanding that. And then it helps you just write a better patent and better claims. We'll kind of do this quickly. So what's the difference there's different kinds of patent applications. There's a provisional and a non-provisional. And Stephen, if you would sort of briefly, what's the requirements for claims in these two applications?
Well, I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation, knowing that you're on the other side of the coin from us. We suggest like provisionals are when you kind of for people that are the first time out there, they're going after a patent and they're maybe afraid. That's kind of the biggest kind of communication that we have is that somebody's afraid to share their idea. They're afraid to talk to an attorney. They're afraid to talk to the patent office. They're afraid to seek help. But how can you succeed if you can't get help and you can't talk about it? So the provisional allows you to just information dump, right? Put all the information that you know about your aha moment. And I'm going to say that a lot because that's the easiest way for me to think of it. What's that criticality, that scientific innovation that you're trying to seek coverage for? Make sure that that's in that provisional. And then you have a year that you can always go back to that date and get that protection for it. And that gives you time to do your market research, to talk to investors, to talk to attorneys, and to get yourself, dot your I's, cross your T's for that non-provisional filing. And then really that non-provisional filing, everything needs to be correct. I've had where somebody comes back and they say, oh, we need to proofread in this whole paragraph. We left it out. And it's just like, you can't do that. So everything has to be perfect with that non-provisional because that's what's, but I've also heard from the other side of the coin that attorneys would like you to reach out to them first before filing the provisional, because it will just set you up better for the non-provisional. So Doug, I'm curious, how do you suggest people use provisionals?
Well, there's several strategies for the provisional application, and this will bring us to this sort of these deadlines. So here's some of the, quickly the general rules. So the general rule is if there's a public disclosure in the United States, you have 12 months to get a patent on file, or you lose your rights. I literally filed a patent application provisional 30 minutes ago because the inventor is presenting his invention this afternoon to potential investors. He needed that on file, so he didn't want to start the clock running. You have 12 months from that provisional. The interesting part about provisionals is that I think they need to have as much detail as possible because you're going to rely on them later. There is the cover sheet concept, and then there is the detailed provisional concept. I think provisionals have to have at least one well thought through claim. There's no requirement for that. The patent office doesn't need a claim, but if there's not one well thought through claim, it tends to be analogous to building a building without necessarily having a proper set of blueprints. So if you don't have that, it's difficult to understand what you're doing. And there's a lot of put in the application everything that you can disclose because let's make sure it's covered. But I really do think there should be a well thought through claim, at least one in every provisional application. We won't get into some of the information on this slide too much, but just to let people aware of this, when you disclose an invention, whether it's a provisional or non-provisional, that 12-month window to get an application on file, that's only in the United States. Everywhere else, once there's a disclosure, you don't have 12 months. You've lost your rights to get patent protection in that country. So the United States is generous enough to give us a 12-month window, which I think is kind, but in the minority of other countries. But this is about claim drafting. Provisionals don't need claims, non-provisionals do. But I really think it's a good idea to put at least one good solid claim in that first provisional.
If I could add one. Sure. So one of the cool things about that is we did move to first to file. And so that's what you were talking about with, presenting the idea. You want to have it like calling dibs, like today is the day that I'm announcing that I have rights to this. The examiner, in terms of the prosecution of the non-provisional patent, will give you that date if you basically say the sentence like the criticality of this feature is blah, right? And they're like, cool. And then they search for that date of the provisional patent. And so you can actually have examination where certain aspects of the claim have the date for the provisional patent, and then other aspects of the claim have the non-provisional just because it wasn't fully disclosed in that provisional patent. It makes a hard prosecution for sure, because you're like, well, this feature, this, I'm sure we'll get into the rejections and stuff, but 103 rejections, it's like you can have where they have different dates, where the foundation first reference is to the provisional date, and then the secondary reference is to the non-provisional date, just because you didn't disclose that specific detail in the provisional patent at all.
Well, that's right. And this slide is really the law part that says, hey, this all points to one thing, really. In your provisional, have as much detail as you possibly can at the time, because like Stephen was saying, it's possible a claim later is going to need that. So when you're drafting these applications, I really think provisional should have at least one well thought through claim. And that's all this slide's trying to get at. The same thing here. We know that the application defines the invention. And one of the things I want to point out is if the box in the middle of the screen on the right, applicants can serve as their own lexicographers. This is particularly true in the claims. So Stephen, first of all, what does that mean? And then second, how have you seen that in practice when you're reviewing claims?
Right. When you are your own lexicographer, if you say a term, it has to be in the specification, and it can't be wishy-washy either. It has to say blah, oftentimes in quote, means or is this, right? As soon as it says maybe blah, right? And if it gets wishy-washy, then you are no longer your own lexicographer. But you are allowed to be dictionary.com. You're allowed to say, this is my new term that I need in order to fully convey what my intellectual property is that I'm seeking coverage for. But then in your specifications, you really go into like, in order to have such and such effect, the surface area to volume needs to be XYZ. And you're allowed to do that. And then it just keeps the claims cleaner, I think is why they do that, as opposed to fully explaining everything.
That's right. And just so where I have seen lexography is nothing more than you get to make up your own words. I mean, that's really what it is. And those words don't even have to exist before. You can literally make up your own words. You just have to have them well defined. I can tell you in practice, when you start using a word outside its normal definition, you can run into trouble, because there's the broadest reasonable interpretation is what the office uses to look at a claim and read a claim. And when you start making words up, you really are starting to put in question where some of those boundaries are. So while it's beneficial because you can get over prior art and make this application more allowable by using your own words in the claims, you can run into interpretation problems. So I think it's something to be considered, which brings us to this. When we're talking about what's the invention, let's really understand what the invention is. At the end of the day, what is it? An example we'll see later is going to be a vehicle, or one of the things I use is a roller skate. We know what a boot is. You know, when we start using something that says like a foot wrapping, which doesn't really may mean a boot or not, that's where we start running into trouble. But if we look at the difference between a roller skate and a rollerblade, an example I love using, the boot doesn't really have anything to do with it. It's all about the wheels. So let's not spend a whole lot of time on the boot. So when we're drafting the claims, let's focus on exactly what is the invention. So have conversations before you draft your claims and say, what's the invention? And from Stephen, from your standpoint, I mean, I know the answer to this question, I'll ask it anyway. Can you tell if the inventor understands their invention or not, either by the claims or an interview? I mean, how easy or hard is that to do?
It's very apparent when somebody has not looked at another patent in their own field of endeavor. It's so easy. The way they wrote the specifications, the amount of detail to things that, like you're saying, one of ordinary skill in the art would know. And they're going on and on about it. And it's just, and when I look at a claim, if it's one full page that explains what would just really be in the inherent properties of, saying, a battery, right? A battery has to have an anode, a cathode, and an electrolyte. I don't need to know the nuts and bolts. I need to get into what your specific thing is. And the longer you spend talking about it, the more it's just like, okay, are you hiding the ball, or do you not understand? Those are really the way that you start to think about as the examiner's point of view. That's right.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Claim, know what your invention is, and claim it. I mean, that's sort of this is sort of the strategy that goes behind this. We'll spend a little bit of time on this. This is interesting, though, because it's got to be done in a way to where you're claiming your invention, it gets over the prior art, it fits your business goals, it's something an examiner will understand. It's a lot. Really getting into the claims is really why I say the critical part. As a practicing patent attorney, we probably spend 60, 70, maybe more % of our time on the claims. I mean, that's really where we spend it. And it's amazing how long it takes to write half a page or a page long claim. It's because you've got to really worry about that.
I want to, you said a phrase there that I want you to highlight, that the examiner will understand.
Yes.
Right? Because the inventor and you, like as the attorney, you guys spend time, you know what the invention is, you know what the novel features are. An examiner picks up a case and they have X amount, like minutes, to read what the claim is, the abstract, the summary, and get an idea, a sense of what the invention is. Minutes, right? Yes. And then they have to start searching. And then they have to start writing. So communicating it clearly is advantageous for everybody.
Yeah, it really, really is. I mean, that's just one of the things that is just critical. Let's see here, where are we? This is sort of the same idea. Be careful with your claim language, and this is sort of an important part. The very last line, look at US patents and examples of how to draft. If you're doing your own claims or you've done this, there's no reason not to go see, what are we doing here, particularly if it's your first time for doing that. And there are several ways to get patents. One of them is US Patent and Trademark Office has a search feature. If you look at the bottom, there's the flat out search feature. Another somewhat popular one is Google Patents, which a lot of people use. It's got artificial intelligence in there that can actually help you find. There's a button that says find similar applications. I've found it to be kind of okay because it's doing the best job it can. It is the searching. One of the things you have to be careful about is, as we talked about earlier, you can be your own lexographer. When you search, it's a text search usually, and knowing what to call something can be challenging. For example, and I would not search this, a fastener could be a nut and a bolt. Velcro is never called Velcro. It's a hook and loop fastener. So knowing the words, like Stephen was saying, in the area that you specialize in or trying to work in is important for this. But either of these search tools are just fine. I'll give you an example. This is a really bad search. I searched for the assignee being Apple, the owner of the application of the patent, and the word case. Well, there's 16,712 of those patent applications. So when you're doing searches, that's too many. So when you're doing searches, you have to sort of know what you're looking for and really pin these down when you're doing the search. Speaking of that, by the way, let me do my little caveat here. Because the United States Patent and Trademark Office is the US government, it doesn't endorse any particular company or law firm. So now that said, let's talk about Apple. Okay. So Apple is, IBM's historically been the #1 patent filer in the country, almost all years, I think it still is. But what we've got on the screen is on one side is a utility patent, and on the other side is a design patent. And Stephen, if you could tell us the difference between the two, particularly when you get to the design, about what claims of a design are, which are a little weird.
Yeah, so design, yeah, so the utility patent is the functionality. Like how does it work better in terms of the utility that it is trying to achieve, whereas the design patent is covering an ornamental design. So a case having beautiful beveled edges, so when you hold it in your hand, it feels awesome. Again, we're not endorsing Apple, but there's a certain feel versus like the Nokia brick phone, right? That design difference is ornamentation, and there's no added function to it, but they still get protection over the design capabilities. The patent on the utility patent has the circuitry, the nuts and bolts and everything. And there are some utility patents that do kind of get into the design feature where the board utility is arranged in a manner such that it fits perfectly with a beveled edge, right? And so I've kind of seen that a little bit where packing, like efficient packing, is trying to get what is on that gray line between, is that a design feature or does it really have increased utility? And I guess the way that I've seen it is that by saying key phrases such as packing density or lower material utilization, those types of things as reasons for increasing packing to get like basically it is a design feature selection, you could still go after the utility route. Design patents are really all about the figures. You have multiple figures where you have each feature that's important that you're trying to seek the design coverage is clearly identified. The claim itself is not the name of the game. It really is about the whole patent, the design, if you will, like the figures, and then the description talks about the ornamentation feature that you're really going after, and then the claims just state what that ornamentation figure is. I think design patents are a little bit more straightforward.
They are. This right there, the claimed surface of electron is illustrated with a color designation for the color black. I mean, this is the claims are really the figures. And when we look at a design patent, the dotted lines here are not part of the claim. So we're saying this is contextual. We're not saying that's what the claim is. The reason I really enjoy this patent and the series of them that came after this is Apple and Samsung were just in a heavyweight fight for, 10 years over the design of the two phones. And they were using these design patents to fight about. And that's what it was. Without being a little bit cynical, excuse me, Apple prevailed in the United States. Samsung prevailed in South Korea on very similar lawsuits. The home court advantage, there may be something to that, so, without saying more. Okay, but these claims on this design were really what was done. That was part of the thing that we're claiming. This is kind of obvious. Each patent in the utility has to have at least one claim. And then there's something called an independent claim, which stands by itself, and a dependent claim. Either understand what those are, talk with your patent attorney and agent to understand how they're useful. There's a whole strategy behind that that is a little bit too much for us to get into today. But from a strategy standpoint, let's talk about exactly what a claim should or could be, from too specific, too not specific, too general, maybe even generic. And Stephen, sort of what have you seen that's out there?
Yeah, I think it's when something's too general, it literally reads on multiple fields of endeavor. I think just one of the situations is somebody saying an energy device. So I'm in batteries. They say an energy device, and then the way the claims were drafted, it didn't have, the anode, the cathode, the electric, right? It didn't have the battery features, and they were talking about a specific layer formation. But so in my prior art search, I was able to find where they take two electrode pads, put it on both sides of a layer, run a current through it to form, turn something that's green into a sintered matter. But that electrical device actually read on all of the claims. That's not what they were inventing. They're inventing a battery, but they claimed an electrical device. And so if an electrical device is hooked up to the layer that meets all the bounds of the claims, then it's too general, because I can basically talk about an intermediary process, a snapshot in time, and that reads on the claims, and now your claims are rejected. So that's too general. Too specific would be if you have everything, including the kitchen sink, claimed, right? In which case, I think that's what you're talking about with patent strategy. It's not enforceable at that point, because claims don't give you the right to produce it. It gives you the right to preclude other people from infringing on your space. And so if it's just too specific, then it's basically like in that whole house analogy, you've claimed your bathroom, but nothing else is part of your property, even though you have the house and the fence and everything else. And so anybody can come freely in and out of the house and take whatever they want. And you're just like, well, I mean, my bathroom's nice, but I'd like to have more.
That's right. And I can tell you, when very rarely is the strategy that we try to use when we're drafting claims for our clients to kind of follow this. We know the first claim may be too specific. We try to make this as fair a claim, as patentable a claim as possible. And Stephen, I'll just go ahead and share this with you, even though I hesitate to. Then as we move down to the independent, generally a patent application has 20 claims. There's many exceptions to that, but generally we use 3 independents and 17 dependents as a general, and there's reasons for that. The very first one, we try to make it a very fair claim, one that we're pretty sure is allowable. We certainly hope so. As we get down in the claim set, we try to get to where we're like, okay, where can we sort of push the edge a little bit? Where do we think maybe we've got a broader claim or something like that? A perfect office action is when the patent office comes back and says claims 1 through 12 are allowable, 13 through 20 are rejected. We found the edge. And that's really what we try to do. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out where can we be in this spectrum to where we've got an allowable claim that's as broad as possible. And that takes a lot of work. It really does. And that's really the genesis of why claiming in this strategy really makes so much sense. It's hard to do. We'll talk briefly about the pieces of a claim. But I tell you what I think I want to do is do it in this way. So this right here is a simple claim. We will ignore patentability for a minute, and then we will just talk about, Steve, if you could tell us what each of these pieces are.
Sure. So it sets the frame, right? So we have the preamble tells us it's a shovel, right? Well, does a shovel have specific limiting capabilities, right? Well, okay, maybe not a dishwasher, right? So we're not looking at dishwashers anymore. We're looking at a tool, a handheld tool. That's how I would interpret a shovel. Comprising, it means that it can have additional features than what's going to be found in the body. There are some transitional phases that are like, this is the only thing that exists as pertinent utility features. And we'll get into that in just a second. So when we get into the body and it says a handle and a blade having a point thereon, right? Well, if we had a situation where, say it was like a Klingon weapon, right? Does that read on this, right? Well, it has a handle, it has a blade with a point thereon, right? So the Klingon sword kind of meets that. Can it be used as a shovel? Well, sure, it has the utility. You could dig, you know, I don't want to go that far, but yeah, you could dig around with it.
Right.
and so it's so broad, right? And it may have additional features on there, the mechanisms for attaching the blade handle or the metal piece to the handle, right? That connection mechanism may exist and be part of the utility of the inventions, but because it's comprising language, we're not really going to focus on it, right? It's really just, does it have a handle? Does it have a blade?
Yes, and this way, I may get ahead of myself a little bit, but this, we have a handle here and a blade having a point. These aren't necessarily connected, right? So we really have what we will call in the private practice a kit claim. Here's all the pieces. We haven't really told you how they go together yet. So this can be a problem when you're trying to enforce it, and even when you're trying to get it through the patent office, because what is it your invention actually is? It looks like it's two, it potentially could be look like it's two pieces right now. So, and I will tell you that we'll skip to this one. The preamble here, we'll skip here. The preamble can be used this, but it's usually we try to avoid having the preamble make too much of an impact on the rest of the claim. We really try to avoid things like this unless we're putting limitations is what they call it in the preamble. We try to avoid that. We'll run into this, and I think this is important for people who are writing their own claims to understand. Stephen, if you could, the difference between these two, comprising, consisting of, this is a big deal.
It is, it really is. So we don't actually see consisting of a lot of times because there's just material that you don't really need patent coverage for. The nexus of features between the events that you're seeking coverage for is what you're going after. And of course you can add and remove different elements there between. So like comprising is open language, right? It allows additional features to exist. And then consisting of is closed. And one of the things that, and this will have to happen in the prosecution, is that you can have open language. So a battery comprising, and then when we get down into it, it's an anode catalyst layer. And I'm sorry that all my things are about batteries, but a specific layer between two defined features of the claim. And then that layer is A, B, and C, wherein A has this feature, right? And so you can tighten portions of the claims by using the phrase is, and then that then gets consisting of, but you can also say wherein this specific layer within the battery, this specific layer that's defined between these two consists of, or consists essentially of, or consisting of, or is. And then it locks in that those are the three features, they have to be there, and additional features are not interpreted to be there.
Now that, it's an excellent point. I had not thought to bring this up, but I don't know if this is unfortunate or just a product of the patent process, which is over 200 years old. Words like of, is, and a really make a difference. More so than maybe they should, but that's just the way patents go. I'll give you a quick example. If something says a handle or a wheel, does that mean it has to have one wheel, or can it have two wheels and still that's okay? So these A words is what we fight about a lot when we're in the enforcement period, which will bring this to the body of the claim. But I think, let me skip to this and say, this is what we were sort of talking about, how this is potentially we would call a kit claim. You have the pieces, but we don't really know how they go together. Now, this claim says a shovel comprising a handle and a blade having a point. Great. This claim is really where we've connected the pieces. And Stephen, if you would tell us the shovel having a handle and a blade, where the blade is connected to the handle. Now I've connected the pieces. This is a better way to write the claim. This is, again, I'm a little cynical, archaic, but would you be kind enough to tell us why the A and the said are highlighted?
So whenever you see an A, that noun has to exist in the prior art. So the prior art would have to have, and like, what are the features that are pertinent to the claim? So as an examiner, I literally do, I still to this day, after a decade and, almost a decade and a half, every time I see the word A, I circle the noun around it, because that has to be in the rejection. That is what is going to hinge on patentability. So it has to have a handle and a blade, right? And then, so the SEDs define the relative location between those two features, right? So wherein said blade is connected to said handle, right? And so it's not that they are disjointed elements. Yeah, it just defines how, I always go back, and I still sometimes write this in my responses. It's like, this claim will need further, the hip bone is connected to the leg, the leg bone or the knee bone, right? It's like, you really need to paint that picture in the claims. Like, how are these things connected?
Right. Yeah, and then you can actually take this to where we've connected the two pieces, but we can actually get to the point to where it's almost too much. And this is when we start talking about too detailed. What's the value of the protection? And the point here is, say we have a handle and an opening, where the opening includes a linear portion, a curved portion, linear portion, a curved portion. What this is saying is this has to have this type of handle or these features. Well, if anybody makes a shovel that doesn't have this type of handle, we may not be able to stop them from doing that. So we're almost too specific at this point. So this is where we really have that balance between what's patentable and what are we really trying to claim.
Just going back to that the picture real quick. I mean, examiners can be punks sometimes, but so it's like the wooden part below what we would all, as typical people would assume, the handle is that end portion, right? But if you just grab the shaft part and then you have your blade part, that shaft part is separate, right? But it can be held in your hand. And so, I always, with this analogy, like to kind of think of a knife versus a handle. So a knife has the handle, the hilts, and then the blade sometimes, right? Those would be three features of a sword, a knife, those types of things, or just the handle and the blade. So here, instead of saying like a handle, if you said like a handle, a shaft connecting portion, and the blade, right, or the end, then we kind of get around where the examiner wouldn't be able to say that the shaft, although you could hold it in your hand, because you have to have three separate and distinct features that are claimed in the specific succession. And so that's how we would, try to get you guys to claim more, that there's a separate feature than just the shaft portion that a hand could hold.
That's right. And it's pretty common in prosecution to start having to add, even though this is somewhat of a simplistic example, it's pretty common in prosecution to have to start adding some of these limitations to get around the prior art, to get the case allowed. One of the risks we always run in prosecution is that because of this process of potentially having to add these limitations, the claims and the original invention and the commercial synergies that go with the patents, we have to make sure we always keep those there. We're not just getting a patent for patent's sake, because we start losing commercial value. And that's another risk during the prosecution process when we're discussing the claims with an examiner. This is really just a way to where we're just sort of saying the more detail you add, sometimes that's necessary. What we'll do is move on to here and talk about, I'm going to skip this one too, I think. This is patent here to where we have, this is transdermal patch. All right, now this is removable protected layer. This right here is functional layer language. The cover is at least partially bioelastic. Now, Stephen, if you could, I've always been a big fan of writing claims that have structure plus function, because those seem to be the best claims. They seem to explain the invention the best. What have you seen with this sort of concept of structure and function?
I believe that it's gained a lot of weight in the past decade. Before, there was a lot more, you could just kind of hand wave off the function. Anything can function in that, right? A device with the limitations also operates as a test dummy, right? Like if you're just lecturing to an audience and it's not actually being used as a transdermal patch, well, it still has to have all the same technical features. And so even though the use case we've moved away from that, that way of thinking, that just because all the features exist, we are giving more functional weight language, especially in this case, because the functional language of it still includes structurally defining elements, right? So if it just said, a cover, right? Well, a cover could be anything. Literally just, somebody putting a shirt over top of the transdermal patch is a cover, right? And so although there's a functionality with the recitation in this claim, it's still limiting that, okay, well, now the cover layer no longer reads on a shirt, right? It's attached to it. And it has these materials like, I actually think I've seen way worse functional language that doesn't actually say anything. That right. Says something to me.
I'm a big fan of structure and function, because it's particularly and I do a lot of software patents, which I don't call them software patents because technically software patents have a bad connotation. They're system and method patents, but the structure and the function is almost critical to getting an examiner to work with you, because otherwise it's just very difficult to do. So this is where this is coming up, and I've seen it in a lot of other art areas, where this functional component of the claims, I think you're right, is really growing in popularity, and I think it's helpful, because it's knowing what something's doing is a big deal. Well, now this, one comment, go ahead.
Is that it says like a matrix layer consisting of, if it was functional, if it said a matrix layer capable of containing a single layer which contains the effective amount of drugs, right? It's like, well, okay, but that doesn't positively cite that drugs exist inside of the element. It's just that the matrix material has to have some amount of porosity that's potentially capable in some type of environment to hold a drug, right? So if I just found a matrix layer that was porous, and it could, again, and not taking all the other limitations, but focaccia bread at that point could read on that, right? Because it's a porous substrate and it's capable of holding a drug inside of it. So, but since it's contained in this way, with the other elements, we start to kind of get this idea of, okay, maybe this isn't focaccia bread where you just took Tylenol and shoved it into the holes, right? Like,
that's exactly right. I mean, the thing is this is why the claims are so difficult to write and why they take so much time, is because every single word in their arrangement is very difficult. This is an example where they start off as an independent claim. So what does that mean? It means it stands by itself, right? Now, if you would, tell us, what is a dependent claim?
So it modifies the independent claim in some capacity. So here, all of the elements where we see they've been previously defined in the independent claim. You can bring in more structural features by reciting, a subsequent layer, right? And now that's a separate and distinct structural layer that needs to exist for this portion of the prosecution and for this specific claims. But really, in this claim, we're really kind of seeing that how everything's kind of being connected and what the features are. And so it just further modifies. And so in terms of prosecution, if we couldn't find this specific thing, then we could indicate it as allowable, and then it gets brought up almost in its entirety. According to claim 1 gets dropped because it doesn't, of course, now it is a part of claim 1. And so, yeah.
That's the beauty of it, is that in what we are shooting for, at least a very good outcome during prosecution, comes from the benefit of the dependent claims. Here's this independent claim. It's possible an examiner would look at this, do a search, find prior art, reject this claim. In the very same office action, say, but claim 3, and the language sounds something like this. Claim 3 would be allowable if rewritten in independent form with all the, with all the intermittent, that's not the right word, with all the intermittent limitations. What does that really say? There's a different word than that. What they really say is this: take this language right here, add it to claim 1, and I'll allow it. At the end of the day, that's what that means. And that is a good outcome, because what you've done is you figured out at that point, wow, so this plus claim 1 is really the allowable part. So drafting these dependent claims with that in mind is one of the big benefits and a big advantage if your strategy is to use dependent claims that way. I'm not sure a lot of dependent claims are written with that in mind. I feel like sometimes dependent claims are a bit of an afterthought just to get to 20. But I think that's a misuse of these dependent claims.
The things that I've seen over my career is when everything, including the kitchen sink, is being claimed. So it's like if you're talking about a catalyst layer, and then you start talking about like a heat reformer over here, and there's like really, okay, yeah, sure, the system has it, but why are we talking about that? It has nothing to do with what you think is critical and what you're going to get your invention for. And what ends up happening is, sure, it annoys the, I mean, not annoys, but it takes up time from the examiner. They have to go find a secondary reference that talks about broader systems, right? I think if I like the idea is that at the end of the first round of prosecution, right, after the 2 rounds that you get, and then there's the AFCP 2.0 program that we're pushing for to hopefully be able to dot your I's and cross your T's. If by that point in time you don't have what you believe is like art, like prior art, the references and the rejections, if it doesn't fit your claim yet, you know, how is the communication broken down? Have you interviewed with the examiner yet? Because that's at the end of the day, especially after that first round of prosecution, everybody should know, be communicating in the same, very close together, understand what the invention is.
Well, that's exactly right. And then we've covered this in previous sessions, but I don't think we can cover this enough. Explain briefly the interview process and whether you believe there's a benefit or not in assisting an inventor getting their case allowed or not.
Yeah, the interviews that I've had benefit greatly because, again, it's, you know, I might be thinking of a term very broadly and they're like, oh no, this is what we really want. This is our nexus of invention. This is what's critical. And it's like, oh, okay, I've been doing this for a while. It's like, okay, well, maybe we could just say it this way. And everybody's like, sure. When we were talking yesterday and you said that it's a game of telephone, I think that was the greatest analogy that I've heard about. And sometimes you need to get everybody on the phone and have a meeting of the minds and get everybody on the same page. And again, that transition from the past decade at the patent office, it's really turning into a more collaborative nature where we're trying to get you the best claims possible, the most fair coverage, right? Just not to take up too much more time with this, but you know, when I first came to the patent office, Pat Ryan, when I was interviewing with him, he said, you know, what is a patent? And I said, it's a quid pro quo, 20 years protection for the monopoly. And he's like, cool, that's the definition of it, right? But he shared with me, it was like, for every patent that's issued, on average, like 3.7 jobs are created. So when you issue a patent, you are protecting those jobs, because if you issue a bad patent or something that, you know, gets invalidated later, then those people, their livelihoods are at stake. But if you issue a good patent that's fair, then those 4 jobs not only are secured, but maybe it's a really good patent, and then that company can start to push that needle into a direction where they can feel confident hiring more employees to pursue the technology. And so that's,
there's no question that the work the patent office does in protecting intellectual property has massive impact on the economy. That's been shown worldwide. What I think I want to do is, by the way, this is a good time. If anybody has any questions, let us know. There is a handful of things I want to make sure we cover, and particularly right here. So if you want to run down these, Stephen, and you know, please, if anybody has any questions, please interrupt us. We've been just kind of going on here. But these are sort of the Stephen's handful of here's the things you should do.
Yeah. So yeah, these are all the top bullet points when you're thinking about your claims, right? Like, what is your aha moment? The criticality, your contribution to science, and did you communicate that in the claims and as well as in the specification? Again, consider drafting your claims first, so that way you not only identify what it is you're trying to seek coverage for, but then when you are in your written description, all of the terms that you use in your claims are defined. That's just a legal thing that's going to help you out in the long run, and that they're clear. Just a little bit more on that one. I've had in the fuel cells and batteries, sorry to keep going back to that, somebody claims a separator, and a separator is an ionic separator between an anode and a cathode, that electrolyte membrane layer. But also there's an electrical insulative layer that separates two battery cells. So if you just say generically a separator without any further context, as an examiner, I don't know what you're talking about. And I have the liberty to kind of pick and choose whichever one, has prior art for. Review both of and make necessary additions, right? So go back and forth, make sure that you're telling a story. You're the author of your own invention, right? Does the written description and the claims, do they make sense together? And then maybe you even need to go back and provide a little bit more in the background section. So that way somebody who picks up your patent is like, oh, I know that this is a problem. You solved it by changing the porosity, and the prior art mentions porosity, but they didn't highlight this critical feature. I should update the background section and then highlight that in my summary, and then that'll play well into the written description. And then everybody understands when they get to the claims what I feel is my inventive concept. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's the first thing I always say to everybody. When you think you have an idea, what other patents have you looked at in this field of technology? Because one, you're going to get the language. You're going to know what other people assume is relevant in knowledge. We always used to say too that 5 minutes in the library can save you 5 years in the lab. So it'll help you out. Antecedent basis is that all terms are defined, clearly eligible, and then think about what legal protections you need for your invention. Tailor your claims accordingly.
Sure.
And that's also known in your competition. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's so a couple of things. One is I'll insert this because Stephen, I don't think we've had this conversation yet, but whether you know this or not, Proterra is one of the South Carolina companies, or at least had its origins here, and it's got a battery or two. The St. Jude's flat battery for pacemakers was actually, the inventors are from South Carolina, and I am fairly confident ran through your art unit many years ago. So I'll go ahead and ask you this question because it's from one of the attendees, but then I will help answer it because you're in batteries. It says, any more linguistic tips for claims related to utility or design patents for software graphical user interfaces? Something Stephen does not do at all. If you have insights on that one, I mean, for us, when I get that, I always just throw out the 101 guidelines. Yes, to me is when you're talking about linguistic tips or drafting the claims toward graphical user interfaces, that's where you really want to be talking about the structure and the function. And when I say structure, I really mean what's the data doing and what does it represent in the physical world. And that's back to the Dalmer case, but it's really talking about things like this user interface, the X-ray case. X-ray was deemed patentable because a digital image of an X-ray was a digital representation of a physical thing. And that was being able to associate that structure to something physical is a big deal. Then saying, okay, so who cares? Well, when we digitize an X-ray, we're able to do these things with it, which is an improvement in the art. So when we talk about graphical user interfaces, what we're really doing is sort of doing the same thing. This graphical user interface changes the way the physical world works. The simplistic example was back in the day when DOS went to OS2 or Windows. I mean, those were just changing the way things work, and being able to highlight that is a big deal. Getting into those details is probably, invention by invention specific, but I mean, Apple patented the touchscreen on a very specific embodiment of the touchscreen for their phones, and was able to get it through. So it is certainly possible to do. Absolutely. Now let's talk about Stephen's, since we've talked about his favorite ones, let's talk about his don't do these.
Okay, so 2 statutory classes. So a method of making something and the product therefrom. That's just, don't do that. So it's a 101 violation, basically. And also it just muddies the record because as we were saying earlier, like the product claim needs to stand alone in its utility, but also as like a test dummy, right? Where you're just lecturing about it. So really, if it's the method of making it or is it the widget, right? And both have different considerations through examination and then in the prosecution afterwards. Do not use terms inconsistently. So as I said, like from the examiner's point of view, if I see A, then it says like the first end of the layer of layer A, right? Like keep using that specific phrase that followed the A and just replace the, and then it's just, you won't have antecedent basis issues, right? And it's really, again, that's a USC 112 issue, and it just makes the claims very clear and cookie cutter as to like what piece is being modified, especially as you start getting into the dependent claims. Also with the consistency, when you have dependent claims, it can be like a dependent tree where like claim 2 depends on 1, claim 3 depends on 2, but claim 4 might depend on claim 1. Now, in that situation of claim 4, if you defined a new structural feature in claim 2 or 3, although numerically 4 is after those, you still would have to say that feature again, because in the line of 1 and 4, if it's a new feature that doesn't exist, we examine it, it would have an antecedent basis issue. I don't know if it's the same one as 2 because it's not depending on 2 or 3, you know, and that's in that regard. So really making sure you have consistency in your claims. Don't write multiple sentences. That's just a rule. It's just been passed down. And so we really get these awesome run-on sentences. I think my use of colons and semicolons has increased exponentially by my tenure at the Patent Office.
Yes.
Yeah, I already referred to don't refer to. Only a portion. Oh, and you can't like, yeah, I'll just cover these last two together. So if you define a structural feature in claim 1 in a dependent claim, you can't say wherein that feature doesn't exist, right? Because now I don't know, then it calls into question, is this just air? Does all of this not need to exist, right? So really, you're not allowed to remove or say, okay, well, this was required for claim 1, but now it's not, we're replacing it with this. Again, it's like, okay, well, now can your patent read on a tree because we replace everything with bark and roots, right? Like, again, it's not definite. And that's a USC 112 issue. And those are the guidelines that it takes for patent prosecution and what guides us as examiners.
That's right. We have 2 questions, and I will handle one of them because it's an easy one. So is a provisional application read at all or just filed as a placeholder? It is not examined at all by the Patent Office. That's the B answer. The A answer is if you ever have to enforce your patent, it's going to be read by the opposing side, and it better be right. So I hope that answers the question. The other question, this was one for you, Stephen. Does an examiner have a limited time to consider patent applications? For example, do you have a maximum of 4 hours to look at something?
Yeah, so we're cog workers basically. So every action that we pick up has a quantified amount of time that it's supposed to take. And it also depends on your seniority and what grade level you are at the Patent Office. And also what art you look at. So if you're looking at toothbrushes, you have less time per patent than you do if you're looking at business methods and the computers and stuff like that. They have a lot more time in business methods because there's the field endeavor is just so rich with resources that it takes more time to look at them. I guess one of the other important factors is like, it's kind of up to the examiner to give each case the adequate amount of time that is reasonable, and hopefully the office keeps track of that and increases time as accordingly. Yeah, no, it's very much when we have a first action, it's kind of associated with a certain amount of hours that we're supposed to get it done in. You could shift some between cases if one's a little bit easier or if one's a little bit harder, but it's kind of time management skill in terms of the examiner.
You got it. Well, we are out of time, so I will turn it back over to Cherish.
Thank you so much, Doug and Stephen. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. Just want to remind all of the attendees that this presentation, the recording of this presentation will be emailed to everyone along with the full presentation. So you'll also get that PDF, and on that PDF, there are tons of resources that Stephen has been so generous in putting together for us. Links to the USPTO website, and also specific people that you can get in touch with there to have more questions answered. And also wanted to let you know that there's going to be a survey after the webinar. If you could be so kind as to complete that survey, we would appreciate that. It just helps SCRA put on better webinars in the future. And also, speaking of webinars coming up in the future, the next one is coming up on the 19th. That is the Path to a Patent Part 5. And you can find a link to register for that one at the SCRA website. And they also have some other webinars coming up as well. So thank you very much. Good to see you guys. Have a great rest of your week.
Take care.